Part 3, Chapter 6. A Busy Night. Section 1. During that day Virginsky had spent 2 hours in running round to see the members of the quintet, and to inform them that Shatov would certainly not give information because his wife had come back and given birth to a child, and no one who knew anything of human nature could suppose that Shatov could be a danger at this moment. But to his discomfiture he found none of them at home except Erkel and Lyamshin. Erkel listened in silence, looking candidly into his eyes, and in answer to the direct question, would he go at 6 o'clock or not, he replied with the brightest of smiles that of course he would go. Lyamshin was in bed, seriously ill, as it seemed, with his head covered with a quilt. He was alarmed at Virginsky's coming in, and as soon as the latter began speaking he waved him off from under the bedclothes, entreating him to leave him alone. He listened to all he said about Shatov, however, and seemed for some reason extremely struck by the news that Virginsky had found no one at home. It seemed that Lyamshin knew already, through Liputin, of Fedka's death, and hurriedly and incoherently told Virginsky about it, at which the latter seemed struck in his turn. To Virginsky's direct question, should they go or not, he began suddenly waving his hands again, entreating him to let him alone, and saying that it was not his business and that he knew nothing about it. Virginsky returned home dejected and greatly alarmed. It weighed upon him that he had to hide it from his family. He was accustomed to tell his wife everything, and if his feverish brain had not hatched a new idea at that moment, a new plan of conciliation for further action, he might have taken to his bed like Lyamshin. But this new idea sustained him. What's more, he began impatiently awaiting the hour fixed, and set off for the appointed spot earlier than was necessary. It was a very gloomy place at the end of the huge park. I went there afterwards on purpose to look at it. How sinister it must have looked on that chill autumn evening! It was at the edge of an old wood belonging to the Crown. Huge ancient pines stood out as vague sombre blurs in the darkness. It was so dark that they could hardly see each other 2 paces off, but Pyotr Stepanovitch, Liputin, and afterwards Erkel brought lanterns with them. At some unrecorded date in the past a rather absurd-looking grotto had for some reason been built here of rough unhewn stones. The table and benches in the grotto had long ago decayed and fallen. 200 paces to the right was the bank of the third pond of the park. These 3 ponds stretched one after another for a mile from the house to the very end of the park. One could scarcely imagine that any noise, a scream, or even a shot could reach the inhabitants of the Stavrogins' deserted house. Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch's departure the previous day and Alexey Yegorytch's absence left only 5 or 6 people in the house, all more or less invalided, so to speak. In any case it might be assumed with perfect confidence that if cries or shouts for help were heard by any of the inhabitants of the isolated house, they would only have excited terror; no one would have moved from his warm stove or snug shelf to give assistance. By 20 past 6 almost all of them except Erkel, who had been told off to fetch Shatov, had turned up at the trysting place. This time Pyotr Stepanovitch was not late; he came with Tolkatchenko. Tolkatchenko looked frowning and anxious; all his assumed determination and insolent bravado had vanished. He scarcely left Pyotr Stepanovitch's side, and seemed to have become all at once immensely devoted to him. He was continually thrusting himself forward to whisper fussily to him, but the latter scarcely answered him, or muttered something irritably to get rid of him. Shigalov and Virginsky had arrived rather before Pyotr Stepanovitch, and as soon as he came they drew a little apart in profound and obviously intentional silence. Pyotr Stepanovitch raised his lantern and examined them with unceremonious and insulting minuteness. "They mean to speak," flashed through his mind. "Isn't Lyamshin here?" he asked Virginsky. "Who said he was ill?" "I am here," responded Lyamshin, suddenly coming from behind a tree. He was in a warm greatcoat and thickly muffled in a rug, so that it was difficult to make out his face even with a lantern. "So Liputin is the only one not here?" Liputin, too, came out of the grotto without speaking. Pyotr Stepanovitch raised the lantern again. "Why were you hiding in there? Why didn't you come out?" "I imagine we still keep the right of freedom, of our actions," Liputin muttered, though probably he hardly knew what he wanted to express. "Gentlemen," said Pyotr Stepanovitch, raising his voice for the first time above a whisper, which produced an effect, "I think you fully understand that it's useless to go over things again. Everything was said and fully thrashed out yesterday, openly and directly. But perhaps, as I see from your faces, someone wants to make some statement. In that case I beg you to make haste. Damn it all! There's not much time and Erkel may bring him in a minute." "He is sure to bring him," Tolkatchenko put in for some reason. "If I am not mistaken, the printing press will be handed over to begin with?" inquired Liputin, though again he seemed hardly to understand why he asked the question. "Of course. Why should we lose it?" said Pyotr Stepanovitch, lifting the lantern to his face. "But, you see, we all agreed yesterday that it was not really necessary to take it. He need only show you the exact spot where it's buried, we can dig it up afterwards for ourselves. I know that it's somewhere 10 paces from a corner of this grotto. But, damn it all, how could you have forgotten, Liputin? It was agreed that you should meet him alone and that we should come out afterwards. It's strange that you should ask, or didn't you mean what you said?" Liputin kept gloomily silent. All were silent. The wind shook the tops of the pine trees. "I trust, however, gentlemen, that every one will do his duty," Pyotr Stepanovitch rapped out impatiently. "I know that Shatov's wife has come back and has given birth to a child," Virginsky said suddenly, excited and gesticulating and scarcely able to speak distinctly. "Knowing what human nature is, we can be sure that now he won't give information, because he is happy, so I went to every one this morning and found no one at home, so perhaps now nothing need be done." He stopped short with a catch in his breath. "If you suddenly became happy, Mr. Virginsky," said Pyotr Stepanovitch, stepping up to him, "would you abandon not giving information? There's no question of that, but any perilous public action which you had planned before you were happy, and which you regarded as a duty and obligation, in spite of the risk and loss of happiness?" "No, I wouldn't abandon it. I wouldn't on any account," said Virginsky with absurd warmth, twitching all over. "You would rather be unhappy again than be a scoundrel?" "Yes, yes, quite the contrary. I'd rather be a complete scoundrel. That is, no, not a scoundrel at all, but on the contrary completely unhappy rather than a scoundrel." "Well, then, let me tell you that Shatov looks on this betrayal as a public duty. It's his most cherished conviction, and the proof of it is that he runs some risk himself, though, of course, they will pardon him a great deal for giving information. A man like that will never give up the idea. No sort of happiness would overcome him. In another day he'll go back on it, reproach himself, and will go straight to the police. What's more, I don't see any happiness in the fact that his wife has come back after 3 years' absence to bear him a child of Stavrogin's." "But no one has seen Shatov's letter," Shigalov brought out all at once, emphatically. "I've seen it," cried Pyotr Stepanovitch. "It exists. And all this is awfully stupid, gentlemen." "And I protest," Virginsky cried, boiling over suddenly, "I protest with all my might. I want... this is what I want. I suggest that when he arrives we all come out and question him, and if it's true, we induce him to repent of it, and, if he gives us his word of honour, let him go. In any case we must have a trial, it must be done after trial. We mustn't lie in wait for him and then fall upon him." "Risk the cause on his word of honour? That's the acme of stupidity. Damnation, how stupid it all is now, gentlemen! And a pretty part you are choosing to play at the moment of danger." I protest," Virginsky persisted. "Don't bawl, anyway. We shan't hear the signal. Shatov, gentlemen. Damnation, how stupid this is now! I've told you already that Shatov is a Slavophil, that is, one of the stupidest set of people. But damn it all, never mind, that's no matter. You put me out. Shatov is an embittered man, gentlemen, and since he has belonged to the party, anyway, whether he wanted to or no, I had hoped till the last minute that he might have been of service to the cause, and might have been made use of as an embittered man. I spared him and was keeping him in reserve in spite of most exact instructions. I've spared him 100 times more than he deserved. But he's ended by betraying us. But hang it all, I don't care. You'd better try running away now, any of you. No one of you has the right to give up the job. You can kiss him if you like, but you haven't the right to stake the cause on his word of honour. That's acting like swine and spies in government pay." "Who's a spy in government pay here?" Liputin filtered out. "You, perhaps. You'd better hold your tongue, Liputin. You talk for the sake of talking, as you always do. All men are spies, gentlemen, who funk their duty at the moment of danger. There will always be some fools who'll run in a panic at the last moment and cry out, 'Aie, forgive me, and I'll give them all away.' But let me tell you, gentlemen, no betrayal would win you a pardon now. Even if your sentence were mitigated, it would mean Siberia. And what's more, there's no escaping the weapons of the other side, and their weapons are sharper than the government's." Pyotr Stepanovitch was furious and said more than he meant to. With a resolute air Shigalov took 3 steps towards him. "Since yesterday evening I've thought over the question," he began, speaking with his usual pedantry and assurance. I believe that if the earth had given way under his feet, he would not have raised his voice nor have varied one tone in his methodical exposition. "Thinking the matter over, I've come to the conclusion that the projected murder is not merely a waste of precious time, which might be employed in a more suitable and befitting manner, but presents moreover that deplorable deviation from the normal method which has always been most prejudicial to the cause, and has delayed its triumph for scores of years, under the guidance of shallow thinkers and preeminently of men of political instead of purely socialistic leanings. I have come here solely to protest against the projected enterprise, for the general edification, intending then to withdraw at the actual moment, which you, for some reason I don't understand, speak of as a moment of danger to you. I am going. Not from fear of that danger, nor from a sentimental feeling for Shatov, whom I have no inclination to kiss, but solely because all this business from beginning to end is in direct contradiction to my programme. As for my betraying you and my being in the pay of the government, you can set your mind completely at rest. I shall not betray you." He turned and walked away. "Damn it all, he'll meet them and warn Shatov," cried Pyotr Stepanovitch, pulling out his revolver. They heard the click of the trigger. "You may be confident," said Shigalov, turning once more, "that if I meet Shatov on the way I may bow to him, but I shall not warn him. But do you know, you may have to pay for this, Mr. Fourier." "I beg you to observe that I am not Fourier. If you mix me up with that mawkish, theoretical twaddler, you simply prove that you know nothing of my manuscript, though it has been in your hands. As for your vengeance, let me tell you that it's a mistake to cock your pistol. That's absolutely against your interests at the present moment. But if you threaten to shoot me to morrow or the day after, you'll gain nothing by it but unnecessary trouble. You may kill me, but sooner or later you'll come to my system all the same. Good bye." At that instant a whistle was heard in the park, 200 paces away from the direction of the pond. Liputin at once answered, whistling also as had been agreed the evening before. As he had lost several teeth and distrusted his own powers, he had this morning bought for a farthing in the market a child's clay whistle for the purpose. Erkel had warned Shatov on the way that they would whistle as a signal, so that the latter felt no uneasiness. "Don't be uneasy, I'll avoid them and they won't notice me at all," Shigalov declared in an impressive whisper, and thereupon deliberately and without haste he walked home through the dark park. Everything to the smallest detail of this terrible affair is now fully known. To begin with, Liputin met Erkel and Shatov at the entrance to the grotto. Shatov did not bow or offer him his hand, but at once pronounced hurriedly in a loud voice: "Well, where have you put the spade, and haven't you another lantern? You needn't be afraid, there's absolutely no one here, and they wouldn't hear at Skvoreshniki now if we fired a cannon here. This is the place, here, this very spot." And he stamped with his foot 10 paces from the end of the grotto towards the wood. At that moment Tolkatchenko rushed out from behind a tree and sprang at him from behind, while Erkel seized him by the elbows. Liputin attacked him from the front. The 3 of them at once knocked him down and pinned him to the ground. At this point Pyotr Stepanovitch darted up with his revolver. It is said that Shatov had time to turn his head and was able to see and recognize him. 3 lanterns lighted up the scene. Shatov suddenly uttered a short and desperate scream, but they did not let him go on screaming. Pyotr Stepanovitch firmly and accurately put his revolver to Shatov's forehead, pressed it to it, and pulled the trigger. The shot seems not to have been loud; nothing was heard at Skvoreshniki anyway. Shigalov, who was scarcely 3 paces away, of course heard it. He heard the shout and the shot, but as he testified afterwards, he did not turn nor even stop. Death was almost instantaneous. Pyotr Stepanovitch was the only one who preserved all his faculties, but I don't think he was quite cool. Squatting on his heels, he searched the murdered man's pockets hastily, though with steady hand. No money was found; his purse had been left under Marya Ignatyevna's pillow. 2 or 3 scraps of paper of no importance were found: a note from his office, the title of some book, and an old bill from a restaurant abroad which had been preserved, goodness knows why, for 2 years in his pocket. Pyotr Stepanovitch transferred these scraps of paper to his own pocket, and suddenly noticing that they had all gathered round, were gazing at the corpse and doing nothing, he began rudely and angrily abusing them and urging them on. Tolkatchenko and Erkel recovered themselves, and running to the grotto brought instantly from it 2 stones which they had got ready there this morning. These stones, which weighed about 20 pounds each, were securely tied with cord. As they intended to throw the body in the nearest of the 3 ponds, they proceeded to tie the stones to the head and feet respectively. Pyotr Stepanovitch fastened the stones while Tolkatchenko and Erkel only held and passed them. Erkel was foremost, and while Pyotr Stepanovitch, grumbling and swearing, tied the dead man's feet together with a cord and fastened the stone to them, a rather lengthy operation, Tolkatchenko stood holding the other stone at arm's length, his whole person bending forward, as it were, deferentially, to be in readiness to hand it without delay. It never once occurred to him to lay his burden on the ground in the interval. When at last both stones were tied on and Pyotr Stepanovitch got up from the ground to scrutinise the faces of his companions, something strange happened, utterly unexpected and surprising to almost every one. As I have said already, all except perhaps Tolkatchenko and Erkel were standing still doing nothing. Though Virginsky had rushed up to Shatov with the others, he had not seized him or helped to hold him. Lyamshin had joined the group after the shot had been fired. Afterwards, while Pyotr Stepanovitch was busy with the corpse, for perhaps 10 minutes, none of them seemed to have been fully conscious. They grouped themselves around and seemed to have felt amazement rather than anxiety or alarm. Liputin stood foremost, close to the corpse. Virginsky stood behind him, peeping over his shoulder with a peculiar, as it were unconcerned, curiosity. He even stood on tiptoe to get a better view. Lyamshin hid behind Virginsky. He took an apprehensive peep from time to time and slipped behind him again at once. When the stones had been tied on and Pyotr Stepanovitch had risen to his feet, Virginsky began faintly shuddering all over, clasped his hands, and cried out bitterly at the top of his voice: "It's not the right thing, it's not at all!" He would perhaps have added something more to his belated exclamation, but Lyamshin did not let him finish. He suddenly seized him from behind and squeezed him with all his might, uttering an unnatural shriek. There are moments of violent emotion, of terror for instance, when a man will cry out in a voice not his own, unlike anything one could have anticipated from him, and this has sometimes a very terrible effect. Lyamshin gave vent to a scream more animal than human. Squeezing Virginsky from behind more and more tightly and convulsively, he went on shrieking without a pause, his mouth wide open and his eyes starting out of his head, keeping up a continual patter with his feet, as though he were beating a drum. Virginsky was so scared that he too screamed out like a madman, and with a ferocity, a vindictiveness that one could never have expected of Virginsky. He tried to pull himself away from Lyamshin, scratching and punching him as far as he could with his arms behind him. Erkel at last helped to pull Lyamshin away. But when, in his terror, Virginsky had skipped 10 paces away from him, Lyamshin, catching sight of Pyotr Stepanovitch, began yelling again and flew at him. Stumbling over the corpse, he fell upon Pyotr Stepanovitch, pressing his head to the latter's chest and gripping him so tightly in his arms that Pyotr Stepanovitch, Tolkatchenko and Liputin could all of them do nothing at the first moment. Pyotr Stepanovitch shouted, swore, beat him on the head with his fists. At last, wrenching himself away, he drew his revolver and put it in the open mouth of Lyamshin, who was still yelling and was by now tightly held by Tolkatchenko, Erkel, and Liputin. But Lyamshin went on shrieking in spite of the revolver. At last Erkel, crushing his silk handkerchief into a ball, deftly thrust it into his mouth, and the shrieks ceased. Meantime Tolkatchenko tied his hands with what was left of the rope. "It's very strange," said Pyotr Stepanovitch, scrutinizing the madman with uneasy wonder. "He was evidently struck. I expected something very different from him," he added thoughtfully. They left Erkel in charge of him for a time. They had to make haste to get rid of the corpse; there had been so much noise that some one might have heard. Tolkatchenko and Pyotr Stepanovitch took up the lanterns and lifted the corpse by the head, while Liputin and Virginsky took the feet, and so they carried it away. With the 2 stones it was a heavy burden, and the distance was more than 200 paces. Tolkatchenko was the strongest of them. He advised them to keep in step, but no one answered him, and they all walked anyhow. Pyotr Stepanovitch walked on the right, and bending forward carried the dead man's head on his shoulder, while with the left hand he supported the stone. As Tolkatchenko walked more than half the way without thinking of helping him with the stone, Pyotr Stepanovitch at last shouted at him with an oath. It was a single, sudden shout. They all went on carrying the body in silence, and it was only when they reached the pond that Virginsky, stooping under his burden and seeming to be exhausted by the weight of it, cried out again in the same loud and wailing voice: "It's not the right thing! No, no, it's not the right thing!" The place to which they carried the dead man, at the extreme end of the rather large pond, which was the farthest of the 3 from the house, was one of the most solitary and unfrequented spots in the park, especially at this late season of the year. At that end the pond was overgrown with weeds by the banks. They put down the lantern, swung the corpse, and threw it into the pond. They heard a muffled and prolonged splash. Pyotr Stepanovitch raised the lantern, and every one followed his example, peering curiously to see the body sink, but nothing could be seen. Weighted with the 2 stones, the body sank at once. The big ripples spread over the surface of the water and quickly passed away. It was over. Virginsky went off with Erkel, who, before giving up Lyamshin to Tolkatchenko, brought him to Pyotr Stepanovitch, reporting to the latter that Lyamshin had come to his senses, was penitent, and begged forgiveness, and indeed had no recollection of what had happened to him. Pyotr Stepanovitch walked off alone, going round by the farther side of the pond, skirting the park. This was the longest way. To his surprise Liputin overtook him before he got half-way home. "Pyotr Stepanovitch, Pyotr Stepanovitch, Lyamshin will give information." "No, he will come to his senses and realise that he will be the first to go to Siberia if he did. No one will betray us now, even you won't." "What about you?" "No fear! I'll get you all out of the way the minute you attempt to turn traitors, and you know that. But you won't turn traitors. Have you run a mile and a half to tell me that?" "Pyotr Stepanovitch, perhaps we shall never meet again." "What's put that into your head?" "Only tell me one thing." "Well, what? Though I want you to take yourself off." "One question, but answer it truly. Are we the only quintet in the world, or is it true that there are hundreds of others? It's a question of the utmost importance to me, Pyotr Stepanovitch." "I see that from the frantic state you are in. But do you know, Liputin, you are more dangerous than Lyamshin." I know. But the answer, your answer." "You are a stupid fellow. I should have thought it could make no difference to you now whether it's the only quintet or one of 1,000." "That means it's the only one, I was sure of it!" cried Liputin. "I always knew it was the only one, I knew it all along." And without waiting for any reply he turned and quickly vanished into the darkness. Pyotr Stepanovitch pondered a little. "No, no one will turn traitor," he concluded with decision. "But the group must remain a group and obey, or I'll... What a wretched set they are, though!" Part 3, Chapter 6, Section 1.